Hello again. A dozen or so years ago, I gave a series of 3 sermons in my home church on the 3 times that Jesus is recorded as using a name of somebody, a personal name of somebody, twice. And those 3 times are all recorded for us by Luke. Twice in the Gospel of Luke and once in the book of Acts. Maybe you could speculate for a few seconds on what those 3 persons were that get this double name treatment. Time is up. First was Martha. You might remember an incident where Jesus said, "Martha, Martha." We'll be dealing with that in some detail today. The other time is when Jesus said to somebody, "Simon, Simon, Satan has demanded to sift you." And the third and last time is, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" Not too many of us claim to be Saul of Tarsus or the Apostle Paul. Not too many of us would claim to be Simon Peter, the first of the apostles. I would say most of us, though, are either a Martha or a Mary. And the very fact that we have Martha singled out for special attention in this 5 verses in Luke probably says a lot about how Luke at least saw the church of his day. So the sermon I wanted to give in a church context that I thought was most needful back in those days was Martha, Martha, because I could see that in the churches that Vivian and I had been part of for the 15, 20 years that we'd been Christians at this point, there were far more Marthas generally than there were Marys. So this sermon became very personal to us in our church setting, and you might find it so too. So here's the sermon as originally delivered. Martha, Martha, have we chosen the good portion? And the setting, we deal with the setting of the sermon first. How thankful we should be that we have 4 Gospels, not 1. Even if we had 3, not 4, we might have missed the Good Samaritan, the lost sheep, the prodigal son, all of which are unique to Luke. And so too this little episode in the home of Martha and Mary. Frederick Godet calls this one of the most exquisite scenes which gospel tradition has preserved for us. Godet wrote this magisterial 570-page small print commentary on the Gospel of Luke, which I highly recommend. One of the greatest Bible commentaries or commentators of all time, who happened to be not just a great scholar but a very devout Christian as well. That's not always a combination found together. Now Godet says this is one of the most exquisite episodes which the gospel tradition has preserved to us. We might know a little of Martha and Mary from the even more famous incident in John chapters 11 and 12. In that case, if that doesn't ring a bell right away, we should mention the name of Martha and Mary's brother, Lazarus. And I'm sure you'll remember John's story if we mention his name. Lazarus, Martha, and Mary all seem to be dear friends of Jesus and the apostles in the Gospels. And how dear were they to Jesus? Well, we recall that Lazarus' death brings about the shortest verse in the King James Bible. Jesus wept. Yet in Luke, Lazarus is not even mentioned. Mary appears only in the accusation of her sister and her defense by Jesus. It is Martha who is front and center. It is, according to verse 38, Martha's house. While we've now placed Martha at the center of the episode, let us place ourselves geographically. Although Luke is vague about the place, we learn from John that this home was in Bethany. Some have wondered what this episode is doing in the section of Luke generally regarded as describing Jesus' journey toward Jerusalem. But some of our best commentators suggest that Jesus regularly made trips to Jerusalem for festivals, and therefore this seemingly out-of-place incident can be accounted for. This chronological detail, however, is probably not relevant as to Luke's placing of it here in his Gospel. That is at the end of chapter 10. And this is what Howard Marshall, another great modern commentator, says about the placing of this little 5-verse incident. Marshall says, after the parable which elucidates the meaning of the second commandment comes a story which may be regarded as elucidating the first commandment. Alfred Plummer, another great commentator of yesteryear, says there's a further answer perhaps to the question asked in verse 25 of the previous story or episode. What must I do to inherit eternal life? Plummer says mere benevolence such as that of the Samaritan is not enough. It must be united with and founded upon habitual communion with the divine. So the story's situation in Luke may have more to do with the lesson of the Good Samaritan, who is my neighbor, verse 29, which precedes it, and also with Luke's version of the Lord's Prayer, which follows it in chapter 11. The two great commandments and the divine priorities of the Lord's Prayer certainly seem necessary in any attempt to understand Luke's point in including this exquisite scene in his gospel. Now we have only 5 verses, and they fall under 5 heads, which are 1. Martha, the perfect hostess. Where do we see ourselves in this scene? Are we reclining with Jesus like Mary? Or are we bustling about making sure our guests are well served? How else, after all, should one honor the Messiah? Isn't this what a Jewish woman should be doing anyway? Serving household and guests. Would we criticize such a dutiful hostess if we were there? Mary, the model disciple. Whether Mary had helped in the preparations and left off feeling enough was before her guests, or whether she had not even participated in preparation, is not clear from the account. And commentators are quite divided on this point. But what Mary was doing in taking her position at the feet of Jesus was not only offensive to her sister. Now, Earl Ellis, another modern commentator on Luke, says this: Judaism did not forbid women to be instructed in the Torah, but it was very unusual for a rabbi to lower himself to this. In the social system of the time, women were a rejected group, and Luke pays considerable attention to the acceptance which Jesus accords them. So whether others in the room were offended, we have no clue. But Martha was livid, so much so that she takes a piece not only of her sister, but of Jesus as well. And what of Mary? Was she lazy, inconsiderate, and unloving? In the next segment, we'll talk about C.H. Spurgeon's take on Mary's choice of priorities.